Nothing happens by chance. High atop Mount Ryerson, where clouds tangled with cedar tops and dawns smelled of damp earth and freshly brewed tea, lived a monk named Koji. He was still young, but his eyes held the calm of one who has learned to see without expectation. Every morning, he swept the temple paths of Shogetsuin, a place so remote that even the wind seemed to pause and meditate before passing through its wooden corridors. Koji did not ask many questions. His master, the elderly Doran, often said that answers come to those who don't demand them. So Koji simply tended the garden, prepared the rice, lit incense at the Buddha's altar, and gazed at the river stones as if they held silent teachings. He had lived like this in silence for over 3 years, since the night a nameless orphan was left at the temple gates by a stranger during a storm. "There are no coincidences," Doran said as he took him in from the rain. "Neither the thunder nor you arrived by chance." Those words stayed with Koji, though for a long time he didn't understand them. How could it not be chance that a faceless traveler left him there? How could his abandonment, his loneliness, nights without parents or lullabies, have any meaning? Yet his master never pushed. He only taught him to breathe, to observe, to accept what comes, and not cling to what leaves. One day, while gathering dry leaves from the white sand garden, Koji found something buried beside a rock that seemed untouched for centuries. It was a small wooden figure, carefully carved, wrapped in a piece of blue cloth. He took it with reverence and went to find his master, who was drinking tea outside the meditation hall. "Master Doran," he bowed. "This was hidden in the garden. Should we return it to the earth?" Doran took the figure with slow hands. He turned it over between his fingers, unperturbed. His eyes briefly lifted to the sky, then met Koji's face. "That statue was carved by my master many winters ago. He said whoever found it must face a question that would change their life. I hid it there as he taught me. Now you have found it." Koji said nothing, but something stirred inside him. It wasn't fear, nor joy. It was the feeling of a door opening somewhere he didn't know existed. "What is the question?" he whispered. Doran smiled, as if time itself had been waiting for this moment to reveal its meaning. "The question will come when you are ready, like everything that arrives. Like you, like the rain that night. Nothing happens by chance, Koji. Not even what you don't understand yet." Koji returned to the garden with the figure in his hands. The wind blew from the east, carrying the scent of cherry trees still asleep in the valleys. In the rustling leaves, in the soft evening light, he felt something invisible guiding him always, even on the days he thought he was lost. That night, Koji could not sleep. He sat on the wooden veranda overlooking the pond, beneath a dark sky sprinkled with stars like distant fireflies. Beside him, the wooden figure lay wrapped in its blue cloth, silent as a forgotten promise. The air was still, and the only sound breaking the temple's deep silence was the gentle murmur of water flowing over stone. He remembered the face of the traveler who had left him there, though it was barely more than a shadow in his memory. He could only recall the feeling. Rough hands, a long silence before disappearing into the rain, and Master Doran's voice welcoming him without questions, as if he already knew who he was and why he had come. "That figure was carved by my master," Doran had said. "A question will come, but what question? And when?" Koji closed his eyes and breathed as he had been taught. Without force, without searching, simply letting the air flow in and out like ocean waves that never need a reason to reach the shore. In that calm, an image began to form in his mind. A stone bridge, suspended over an abyss, and on the other side, a figure dressed in white, wrapped in the same blue cloth that enveloped the statue. At dawn, before even the temple bell sounded, Koji went to the master's room. He found Doran preparing the fire to heat water. First, no words were spoken. Only the crackle of wood, soft smoke rising to the open ceiling, and the scent of toasted sesame. "I dreamed of a bridge," Koji finally said, "and someone on the other side wearing this same cloth." Doran nodded without looking up. When the soul is ready, life begins to speak through symbols. Sometimes what we call coincidence is nothing more than the universe whispering. Koji sat facing him, feeling a different stillness settle inside. It wasn't the peace of silence, but the depth of something moving beneath the surface of days. "Should I cross that bridge?" he asked. Doran set aside the bamboo ladle and looked at the young monk directly for the first time that morning. "Not all bridges are for running away. Some are to remember, others to return to places you didn't know you had forgotten, and some to understand that chance is just a name we give to what we don't yet understand." The kettle began to whistle. Outside, the wind gently stirred the bronze bells. Somewhere in the forest, a deer passed through the bushes, unseen but present, like the invisible threads that connect the moments of a life without one knowing it. Koji lowered his gaze to the wooden figure. The blue cloth, now warmed by his body, seemed more alive, as if it held the stories of hidden generations waiting to be remembered. "Maybe that bridge isn't just a dream," he whispered. Doran smiled. "Maybe it never was." 3 days after finding the figure, Koji set out before dawn. He did not decide it, he simply knew. His body rose as if guided by an ancient force. He left no note, said no goodbyes. He just tucked the statue into his cloth bag and walked toward the northern path, the one no visitor took and that monks rarely spoke of. The forest welcomed him without questions. Branches hung like unspoken thoughts, and roots jutted from the earth as if reminding him that all that is visible springs from the invisible. Koji walked without a clear direction, only with the silent certainty that each step was an answer in itself. The day passed slowly, as if time wanted to stretch this moment beyond the world. Crossing a stream, he noticed a stone shaped exactly like the symbol carved at the base of the statue. A circle broken by a dot at its edge. He had seen that symbol only once, in an ancient temple painting depicting the cycle of life and death, the eternal flow of samsara. Was this a sign, or just a coincidence? He wondered. But his mind, trained by years of meditation, did not cling to doubt. He let it drift by like a leaf carried by the water. At dusk, as the sky turned a deep red, he arrived at a clearing where the forest abruptly ended and a misty valley began. There, among rocks and silence, was the bridge from his dream. It was neither large nor majestic. A smooth stone bridge, worn by centuries, with moss growing on its edges. No sign indicated where it led. Yet Koji knew not to hesitate. He crossed with slow steps, as one enters a sacred hall. With each step, he felt voices of the past whispering from the fog. Voices of monks, ancestors, things unsaid but always present. At the other side, no one awaited him. Only a small shrine covered in fallen leaves, and beside it, a bowl of water and an unlit lamp. He knelt before the shrine, unsure why. He took out the wooden figure, placed it before the lamp, and closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, the question Doran had promised finally arrived. But it was neither a voice nor a thought. It was a certainty rising from the depths. Can you accept that everything that happened in your life was necessary to arrive here? Koji trembled, not from cold, but from the truth that question revealed. His loneliness, his abandonment, the nameless traveler, the rain, the garden, the figure, the dream, the bridge, had it all been necessary? His heart pounded hard in his chest. His breath grew slow, heavy. He did not try to answer. He simply let himself be filled with what he felt. Soft tears fell, but they were not of sadness. They were tears of recognition. He had arrived, and for the first time, he understood that there are no wrong paths, only paths that take time to reveal themselves. Night fell without warning, as it always does in the mountains, wrapping the valley in thick, peaceful mist. Koji remained kneeling before the small shrine, motionless, eyes closed, breathing like a barely perceptible breeze. The bowl of water, reflecting the moon through wisps of fog, seemed to hold the entire sky. He wasn't thinking of returning. He wasn't thinking of staying. He had entered a state beyond thought, a place where words were unnecessary, where what simply was. And then, as if the universe answered his silence with more silence, something inside him broke. But it wasn't a violent break. It was like when the ice on a pond yields to the warmth of the sun and, without sound, the water begins to flow again. Koji felt the inner resistances that bound him, to pain, to abandonment, to an uncertain past, dissolving one by one. Not because he understood everything, but because he no longer needed to. The bowl of water vibrated faintly. There was no wind, yet a dry leaf fell from an invisible tree, landing with such precision that it took his breath away, right beside the wooden figure. The blue cloth stirred as if touched by an unseen hand. Koji opened his eyes. He saw no one, but he knew he was not alone. A presence was there, not a physical form, but a consciousness that filled the air like incense sent in the zendo. It wrapped around him without disturbing, accompanied him without taking up space. In his chest, the same question returned, not as doubt, but as an affirmation demanding to be embraced. Can you embrace the fullness of your path, even the parts that hurt? And this time he did not hesitate. Yes, he whispered softly. Yes, I can. The shrine's lamp, without being lit by any hand, began to emit a gentle light. It was neither flame nor oil. It was a soft, warm glow, as if an ancient memory was awakening. The wooden figure seemed to smile. The bowl shimmered as if the moon had dissolved into it. Koji closed his eyes again and bowed until his forehead touched the ground. Not to ask for something, not to give thanks, but to surrender completely to what is. He did not know how long he remained like that. Could have been an hour or eternity. When he finally stood, everything within him was different. Not wiser, not stronger, but lighter, as if he had left an invisible stone on the altar. He took the figure, wrapped it again in the blue cloth, and looked at the bridge from the other side. This time, it no longer seemed a place to cross with feet, but with the soul. And as he crossed, he felt he was not returning to the temple, but entering it for the first time. Because now he understood that nothing, absolutely nothing, neither loss nor abandonment, nor the cold of that night, had been in vain. Everything had been a teaching. Everything had been a calling. Nothing truly had happened by chance. Dawn caught him as he descended the path back. The forest, which days before seemed to guard its secrets in shadows, now appeared transparent and open, as if the trees themselves bowed as he passed. Every stone on the path, every drop of dew on the leaves, seemed to be exactly where it belonged, not by accident, but by a wider will, a subtle intelligence weaving reality with invisible threads. The bridge was behind him, but not inside him. Something of its essence still vibrated with every step he took. When he reached the temple gates, the sun was just beginning to gild the black tile roofs. The air smelled of toasted sesame, burnt wood, and the warmth that precedes the silence of Zazen. No one was in the courtyard except Master Doran, standing beside the cherry tree, gazing at the bare branches of winter. Koji approached without a word. He stopped 3 steps from the master and bowed deeply. There was no need to explain where he had gone or what he had experienced. The elder, who had been a monk longer than the wind could remember, looked at him as if he already knew everything. "Did you find the question?" he asked gently. Koji nodded. "And the answer?" Koji smiled. Not the smile of someone who has solved a riddle, but of one who has stopped resisting the mystery. "It wasn't an answer," he said. "It was acceptance." Doran closed his eyes, as if approving with his whole being. "That is how you receive what cannot be taught." Koji took out the wooden figure, still wrapped in its blue cloth, and offered it with both hands. "I think now it should return to its place." But Doran shook his head slowly. "No, what has been awakened in you can no longer be buried. That figure is no longer a key for you. Now it is a mirror. Keep it, not as an object, but as a reminder." Koji placed it in his bag without insisting. Everything he might have once questioned now seemed unnecessary. Together they walked in silence to the meditation hall. The sound of their footsteps on the wood was soft but steady. They entered without hurry, sat facing the white wall as they did every morning, and began to breathe with the awareness of one who has seen the invisible. In his mind, a single phrase rose with the clarity of a spring flowing from the earth. "There was no mistake on my path. Everything that happened had to happen." And for the first time, those words were not just an idea. They were his way of being in the world. His way of seeing, listening, living. He sought no more answers, because he understood that he was already living within them. The days that followed were the same and yet completely different. Koji returned to his usual tasks, sweeping the temple paths, heating water for tea, lighting incense before dawn. But everything was done with a different presence, a stillness that was not effort, but a natural consequence. Before, sweeping was a chore. Now it was a way to listen. Before, preparing tea was a duty. Now it was an offering. Before, lighting incense was routine. Now it was a wordless prayer. The other monks began to notice the change. Not because Koji spoke more. He remained as reserved as ever. But because his silence was now like a mountain's. Deep, encompassing, full of things that needed no explanation. Brother Rio, one of the eldest, said to him one day while fetching water from the well, "I don't know what has changed in you, but it's as if you're breathing from a deeper place." Koji smiled and simply said, "Maybe I've always breathed from there. I just didn't know it." That afternoon, Master Doran called him to his room. Sunlight filtered through bamboo blinds, painting golden lines on the tatama floor. In the center of the room was an old wooden box, tied with a red thread bow. "This little chest," the master said, "was given to my master by his own, and so it has passed through generations. It is never opened, not because it holds something valuable inside, but because its true teaching lies in knowing it does not need to open to fulfill its purpose." Doran held it for a few moments, then offered it to Koji. "Now it is your turn to keep it." Koji accepted without hesitation, and as he did, something within him settled like a stone on a riverbed. He understood wordlessly that this gesture was neither a reward nor a promotion. It was a transmission, a silent recognition that the cycle had turned once more. "Should I do something with it?" he asked. "Just be with it," Doran replied, "as you are with yourself. There is nothing to do with what is already complete." As he left, Koji sat for a moment on the hall steps, the little chest resting on his knees. The west wind blew softly. Dry leaves danced in circles across the courtyard, each one carrying a story in the way it twirled, touched the earth, and drifted away. In that instant, an image came to him. The traveler who had left him at the temple years ago. For the first time, he felt no pain remembering him. No emptiness. No questions. Only serene gratitude. like the feeling one has for a candle that illuminated just the stretch of path needed. "Thank you," he whispered, not quite knowing to whom, and the world, in its simple, natural way, seemed to answer him, with the movement of a cloud, the distant caw of a crow, the crackle of a branch under the weight of nothing. Everything was in its place. Nothing had been chance. One morning, while the mist still clung to the sleeping cherry trees, Doran did not go out on his usual walk. Concerned, Koji went to his room and found him sitting before the open window, wrapped in his winter cloak, his gaze lost in the white horizon. He breathed slowly, with the peace of one who knows there is nothing left to say. "Master," Koji said softly, "are you well?" Doran turned his head and looked at him with a tenderness that seemed to come from centuries past. "I am being," he replied. Then, with a slight gesture of his hand, he invited Koji to sit beside him. They stayed there, side by side, with no need for words. The air entered the room like an ancient caress. Everything was simple. Everything was complete. Even the nearness of death. "Koji," the master said after a long silence, "do you remember what I told you the night you arrived? You said there are no coincidences, that neither I nor the thunder came by chance." Doran nodded. "I have repeated that phrase many times, but now I know that it is not enough to understand it. One must become it." Koji lowered his head, understanding. "Are you leaving, Master?" "We all leave," Doran replied. "But leaving is not always disappearing. Sometimes it is just changing form." The sun began to paint golden lines on the tatami. The master closed his eyes and for a moment seemed asleep, but Koji knew he was more awake than ever. It was the same silence he had felt at the shrine by the bridge, the same that filled his chest when he accepted his story without resistance. Doran did not die that morning, nor that afternoon, but in the days that followed he spoke less and less. He smiled more, he listened more, and on one ordinary morning, when the breakfast bowl was still warm, he simply did not wake. Koji found him with his hands in gasso position, forehead serene, cloak covering up to his neck. In his lap, carefully wrapped, lay the wooden figure Koji had found months before. On it, the red thread from the little chest, carefully untied. There was no note, no instruction, just that simple, clear, complete gesture. Koji understood. Doran was not leaving him a task, nor a message. He was leaving space. Space for what had been lived to continue without shadow. For the lineage not to be something inherited, but something breathed. That same afternoon, Koji lit the incense, struck the bell, and led the farewell ceremony with steady voice. He read no texts, spoke no speeches. He only said what was enough. Master Doran has left as he lived, leaving nothing unfinished. And nothing, absolutely nothing, happened by chance. The monks bowed their heads, and the wind passed through the temple columns like a prayer without owner. No one wept, no one resisted, only silence spoke, and everyone understood. Years passed. Koji, now with gray streaks at his temples and gentle wrinkles around his eyes, continued sweeping the same paths of the Shogetsuin temple. His steps were slower, but his presence steadier. He no longer asked why leaves fell or why melted snow returned to form the river. He knew everything transformed in its own time. He knew nothing came too early or too late. The little wooden chest remained in his room, still unopened. The carved figure rested on the inner altar, before a flower he replaced each morning. He never sought answers outside. He learned to read the messages in the breeze, in a visitor's smile, in the bamboo's crackle under the rain. One afternoon, while teaching a young novice to arrange the stones in the dry garden, the boy asked, "Master Koji, why do we place them this way, If tomorrow the wind will move them. Koji paused. Looking at the pattern, they formed 3 stones like solitary islands in a sea of carefully raked gravel. Because every movement is also part of the design, he answered. Even when you think it's disturbed, it actually continues. The novice watched silently, not fully understanding. But he asked no more questions. Sometimes seeds take time to sprout. That night, writing in his journal, a practice he had kept since youth, Koji wrote a single line. The mystery is not in what happens, but in how everything fits together. Then he closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. The next morning, he woke to the sound of temple bells. The scent of tea floated in the air. The sky was clear, life whole. He went out to the garden. The wind had moved the stones. He did not fix them. He bowed before them, and within, a certainty breathed with him like an ancient melody finally heard clearly. Every step, every loss, every silence was necessary. Everything was written not in ink, but in presence. Nothing ever happened by chance.